32, 7 months pregnant, and alone on her birthday, Serafina Vance faced the ultimate betrayal, her husband, a tech mogul, in Paris with another woman. This isn't just infidelity, it has corporate espionage, heartbreak, and a fight to reclaim her life. Watch how she burns their golden cage to the ground. One like, one share fuels more stories like this. Thanks for watching.
No matter what comes next,
32 years old,
we
7
face
months
it together.
pregnant with their miracle child, and it was
I'm
her
right
birthday.
here with you.
In a lavish New York penthouse,
As
she
you can
sent the
see,
staff home
our
for the
strategy
day,
paid off.
wanting only him.
We are now
But
poised
Serafina
for global
Vance ate her
expansion.
custom birthday cake alone, while her husband, the famous tech mogul Julian Vance, was supposedly closing a multi-billion-dollar deal in Tokyo. He was actually 30,000 feet over the Atlantic. His destination was Paris, seated in first class, with a companion who was not his wife. This isn't just a story about cheating. It's a story of incredible betrayal, corporate spying, and a woman who had everything, lost it all, and then chose to burn their golden cage to the ground. Stay with us, because if you think you know how this ends, you don't. Serafina Vance traced the rim of her champagne glass, filled with sparkling cider, a small sacrifice for the precious life inside her. The crystal felt cold against her fingertips, a sharp contrast to the warmth she had craved from her husband, Julian. 32. Today was her 32nd birthday, and she was deafeningly alone in their huge 3-story penthouse overlooking Central Park. The apartment, which was normally buzzing with activity and staff meeting their every need, was completely silent. She'd given them the day off, dreaming of a private celebration with Julian, whispering sweet nothings, his hand on her growing belly, with the city lights twinkling below as they reminisced and dreamed. Instead, a single slice of her favorite chocolate truffle cake from a famous bakery sat in front of her. Its richness felt like it was mocking the emptiness in her chest. Julian, her brilliant, charismatic, workaholic husband. He'd called 2 days ago, his voice full of fake regret over a bad connection. "Sweetheart, I am so sorry. The Kaido deal in Tokyo hit a problem. I have to fly out tonight. I'll be back before you know it, and we'll celebrate properly, I promise." Extravagantly. She understood, or at least she pretended to. Julian Vance, the CEO of Vance Innovations, didn't get to where he was by skipping critical international deals. Their life, their penthouse, their future child's legacy, it was all built on his relentless drive. So she smiled into the phone, wished him luck, and told him she loved him, her heart sinking with every word. The promised bouquet of rare orchids never arrived. No delivery man with a velvet box from Cartier, his usual apology gift. She hadn't even received a text since that short phone call. There was just an echoing silence in their grand home, broken only by the distant wail of a siren. As evening faded into night, Serafina wrapped a cashmere throw around her shoulders. The baby, who they affectionately nicknamed Pip, gave a gentle kick as if he could feel her sadness. "Oh, Pip," she whispered, stroking her stomach. "I suppose Daddy's busy making the world spin." She wandered into Julian's home office, a sleek room of mahogany and chrome. He was always incredibly organized, but a single file lay open on his otherwise spotless desk. It wasn't work-related. It looked like a personal travel itinerary. Her brow furrowed. Tokyo was east. This flight path seemed to be heading west. A chilling premonition snaked its way up her spine. With trembling fingers, she picked up the printout. It was a confirmation from Air France's La Première. The passenger names were Julian Vance and a Miss Chloe Dubois. Their destination was Paris, Charles de Gaulle. They arrived this morning, Paris time, on her birthday. The world tilted. La Première, their most exclusive, luxurious first-class suite, the one Julian had once said was reserved for an anniversary trip, just for us. Her breath caught. Chloe Dubois. The name sounded vaguely familiar. An intern from the marketing department? No, that wasn't it. An aspiring actress Julian had briefly mentored, or so he claimed, after a charity gala last spring. Serafina had dismissed her as a harmless young woman with ambition, buzzing around her powerful husband. Clearly, she had been catastrophically wrong. Tokyo, the Kaido deal, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed deception so he could take another woman to the most romantic city in the world, in the most luxurious way possible, while his pregnant wife sat alone on her birthday. The slice of cake on the counter suddenly seemed grotesque. The crystal glass felt like a cruel joke. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and a single hot tear escaped Serafina's eye, tracing a path down her cheek before splashing onto the damning paperwork. It was followed by another, and then another, until she was sinking to the plush carpet. The sound of her own ragged sobs finally filled the suffocating silence of their gilded cage. The initial shock felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs and leaving her gasping. Then came the searing pain, a deep agony that clawed at her insides, more potent than any physical sickness. It wasn't just the affair. It was the calculated cruelty, the depth of the deception. Paris, La Première, Chloé Dubois. Each detail was a fresh stab to her already bleeding heart. For hours, Serafina lay on the floor of Julian's office, the itinerary clutched in her hand, the paper crinkled and damp from her tears. The city lights outside, once a symbol of their shared success, now seemed to mock her. Their glittering indifference was a reflection of Julian's own. Pip stirred within her, a reminder of the innocent life caught in this whirlwind of deceit. This couldn't be just a momentary, foolish mistake. The planning, the lies about Tokyo, the sheer audacity of it all pointed to something deeper and more sinister. Then, a resolve she didn't know she possessed began to rise. Serafina pushed herself up. Her reflection in the darkened window was a stranger, with pale, swollen eyes, but with a flicker of something new in their depths, a chilling stillness. She needed proof, irrefutable proof, not just the itinerary, but something that would eliminate any possibility of denial. Any chance for Julian to gaslight her, to twist the story. Her mind, usually clouded by love and trust, began to clear, sharpened by betrayal. Julian was careless, arrogant. He would have left other traces. She started with his laptop, which she rarely touched. His password, ironically, was Sarah Piplove. The bitter taste of bile rose in her throat. The browser history was wiped clean, of course, but his cloud storage, linked to his phone, was a gold mine he'd overlooked in his haste. There they were, photos, dozens of them, stretching back for months. Julian Chloe laughing intimately at a secluded beach club in St. Bart's. Chloe draped in jewels Serafina now recognized as missing from her own collection. Gifts Julian had claimed were at the jeweler's for cleaning. Chloe posing in the bathroom of what looked suspiciously like their weekend house in the Hamptons. And then the most recent, a selfie of Chloe, champagne flute in hand, real champagne, of course in an Air France La Première suite. A sliver of Julian's custom Savile Row suit was visible beside her. The timestamp was from yesterday. His phone. He'd insisted they link their Find My Phone accounts for safety. She opened the app. Julian's phone was not in Tokyo. It was pinging directly from the 8th arrondissement of Paris, near the Champs-Élysées. Specifically from the Hotel Plaza Athénée, one of the most luxurious and romantic hotels in the city. The hotel where Julian had taken her on their honeymoon. The symbolism was like a physical assault. Each discovery was a fresh wave of nausea. This wasn't a new affair. This was a parallel life. She thought back to all the late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the subtle shifts in his affection she'd dismissed as stress. How blind had she been, or had she simply chosen not to see? The door to the penthouse chimed. Her heart leaped into her throat. Julian? No. It couldn't be. It was past midnight. Peeking through the security monitor, she saw her younger sister, Genevieve, her face etched with concern. Serafina buzzed her in, a wave of relief washing over her. If there was one person in the world she could trust, it was Jen. Genevieve rushed in, her eyes scanning Serafina's tear-streaked face. Sarah, oh my God, what happened? I've been calling you all evening. You weren't answering. I got a weird feeling. Happy birthday, by the way. Though you don't look very happy. Serafina's composure crumbled again. She wordlessly handed Genevieve the printed itinerary and then the tablet displaying the photos. Jen's expression shifted from concern to disbelief, then to a cold, hard fury that mirrored Serafina's own growing anger. That absolute bastard! Genevieve breathed, her voice low and dangerous. Paris with her on your birthday, while you're pregnant with his child. He told me it was Tokyo, Serafina whispered. A vital business deal. Business my ass. Jen spat. He's flaunting this. La Première. The plaza. He's not even trying to be discreet with her. This isn't just cheating, Sarah. This is a declaration of war. Genevieve, ever the pragmatist, took charge. Okay, no more tears. We need to think. What do you want to do? Serafina looked at her sister, the blurry image of her life snapping into sharp, painful focus. The love she thought was the bedrock of her existence was a lie. The man she adored was a stranger, but the baby inside her was real. Her love for Pip was real. Serafina started, her voice trembling but gaining strength. I want to understand how deep this goes, and then I want to make him pay for everything. Genevieve nodded, a grim smile on her face. Great, because I know the perfect person to help us. He owes me a big favor, and he's the best divorce lawyer in all of New York. But first, we need more ammunition. Let's see what else Mr. Vance has been hiding. They dug deeper, sifting through digital footprints, shared financial accounts, and Julian's unsecured personal email, which he barely used but had recently accessed to forward that flight confirmation. It turned out Chloe Dubois wasn't just a mistress, she was a very expensive one. There were charges for designer clothes, fancy dinners, and even the rent for a luxury apartment in Soho. The funds were being moved from accounts Serafina thought were for their joint investments. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. He was systematically draining their future together to pay for his affair. He's not just breaking your heart, Sarah, Genevieve said, her eyes flashing with anger. He's trying to break your bank account, too. This isn't an affair. This is a long con. The last bit of Serafina's sadness turned into a cold, hard rage. Vance had completely underestimated her. He mistook her gentle spirit for weakness and her love for foolishness. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. The game was on. While Serafina and Genevieve were uncovering the ugly truth of Julian's lies in New York, Julian himself was living a fantasy in Paris. He and Chloe Dubois were settled in comfortably. Iconic red geraniums poured from their balcony, with the Eiffel Tower sparkling in the distance. Chloe, a stunning redhead with sharp features and even sharper ambition, was soaking in the luxury. She was 24 years old, and the idea of a powerful, wealthy older man like Julian was intoxicating. He had promised her everything, and for now, he was delivering first-class flights, 5-star hotels, dinners at Le Jules Verne, and shopping sprees on Avenue Montaigne. Isn't this divine, Jules? Chloe purred, sipping champagne as she admired a new diamond bracelet. It was a little something Julian had picked up from Van Cleef and Arpels. Paris agrees with me, Julian smiled, but it was a practiced, charming smile that rarely reached his eyes anymore. Only the best for you, my dear. But even surrounded by luxury, a little bit of unease was starting to creep in. He'd called Serafina with the Tokyo excuse, and she had accepted it far too easily. Serafina, for all her quietness, was very observant. He had expected more questions, at least a hint of suspicion. Her silence was unnerving. He'd also been careless with that flight itinerary. He clearly remembered printing it at his office. Had he shredded it? He thought so, but a nagging doubt lingered. What's wrong, darling? Chloe asked, seeing the shadow cross his face. You seem distracted. Just business, he lied smoothly, topping up her champagne. The keto deal. It's complicated. He had to keep up the act even with Chloe. She didn't need to know about all his problems, or how much this Paris trip was really costing him, not just money, but possibly his entire carefully built life. The truth was, Vance Innovations wasn't as solid as it looked. A recent hostile takeover attempt from a rival, Marcus Thorne of Thorne Industries, had put him under enormous pressure. The keto deal was real, and it was critical, but his best negotiator was handling the first stages in Tokyo. Julian had planned to fly in for the final signing later, using the time difference, hoping Serafina would never know about his detour to Paris. It was a reckless gamble, juggling his company's survival with a high-stakes affair. Chloe, though, was getting impatient. She hadn't worked her way into Julian Vance's life for just a few trinkets and fancy trips. She wanted the ultimate prize, to be Mrs. Vance. When are you going to tell her, Julian? She asked, her voice losing its playful tone. About us? You said soon. You said after the baby, but that feels so far away and complicated. Julian tensed up. We've talked about this, Chloe. The timing has to be perfect. A scandal right now could ruin everything. The company, my reputation, Serafina, is fragile, especially now with the pregnancy. He hated using the pregnancy as an excuse, but it was his most convenient one. Chloe's eyes narrowed. Fragile or just inconvenient? Don't take me for a fool, Julian. I know what I bring to your life. Youth, excitement. I am not going to be your dirty little secret forever. And you won't be, he said. trying to calm her down. But the pressure was building from every direction. Thorne's relentless attacks, the demanding Keat deal, Chloe's growing demands, and the gnawing fear that Serafina might find out the truth. His empire, built on bold risks and ruthless choices, felt like it was about to collapse. Back in New York, Serafina was no longer the weeping woman on the floor. Fueled by coffee and a steely determination, she and Genevieve had worked all night. They contacted Gavin Fletcher, the legal shark Jen had mentioned. Fletcher,
a man famous for taking down powerful cheating husbands,
agreed to an initial meeting the next morning. He was fascinated by the high-profile case and the sheer nerve of Julian's betrayal. "He's not just cheating," Mrs. Vance, Fletcher had said on the phone, his voice crisp and professional. "He's illegally spending marital assets. That first-class Air France ticket, that's Exhibit A. The hotel is Exhibit B. We are going to build a timeline that will make his eyes water." Serafina had also made another call to a discreet private investigator. Fletcher recommended a woman named Anna Sharma, known for being subtle and tech-savvy. Anna's assignment was simple: document Julian's Paris trip with Chloe, every dinner, every shopping spree, every public kiss, and more importantly, dig into Chloe Dubois. Who was she really? What did she want? Was she just a naive girl or a clever player in her own game? "One more thing, Sarah," Genevieve said, pointing to a folder on Julian's cloud drive labeled Vance Innovations Confidential Personal. It wasn't password protected beyond the main login. "This looks like company stuff, but it's in his personal cloud. Maybe something's in here." Inside were documents that didn't make sense to Serafina at first: spreadsheets, internal memos, and draft contracts. But one file name caught her eye: Project Nightingale, contingency funding. It showed a series of offshore accounts and shell companies. Some of the money transfers looked suspiciously like the amounts Julian had been spending on Chloe. "Is he stealing from his own company?" Serafina whispered in horror. Genevieve's eyes went wide. "If he is, and this gets out, Thorne Industries will have a field day. He could lose everything and even go to jail." The stakes had just shot through the roof. This was no longer just about a broken heart and a failed marriage. This was about corporate fraud, intense business rivalries, and the chance of a spectacular public ruin. Serafina felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Julian had lit the match. Now, she was going to pour the gasoline. Their Parisian love nest was about to become the center of an earthquake. 3 days later, Julian Vance returned to New York, not from Tokyo, but from Paris. He had cut the trip short, a knot of anxiety tightening in his gut. Chloe had become more and more demanding, and her possessiveness was starting to suffocate him. More than that, his short, awkward phone calls with Serafina had been deeply unsettling. Her responses were too calm, too polite. The lack of her usual warmth was more frightening than any angry accusation would have been. He landed at JFK with a story ready about the keto deal, moving faster than expected, giving him an early return. He expected tears, maybe some anger about missing her birthday, but nothing he couldn't handle, with a nice gift, a stunning sapphire necklace he'd bought in Paris, and his usual charm. He walked into the penthouse, the sapphire necklace in its velvet box in his pocket, calling out, "Sweetheart, I'm home." The apartment was spotless, but there was a strange chill in the air. Serafina came out of the study, not as the tearful, forgiving wife he expected, but as a woman he barely recognized. Her expression was peaceful, almost disturbingly calm. She wasn't wearing the maternity clothes he was used to. Instead, she wore a tailored dress that, while fitting her pregnancy, also gave her an air of cool professionalism. "Julian," she said, her voice even, without its usual warmth, "welcome back. How was Tokyo?" The tiny emphasis on Tokyo was like a shard of ice down his spine. "Productive," he said, forcing a smile. "Very productive. I missed you so much. Happy belated birthday, my love." He moved to hug her and give her the necklace, but she subtly stepped to the side. "Please sit down, Julian's," motioning toward the living room. Genevieve was there, with the same calm expression on her face, standing next to a man Julian didn't know, tall, perfectly dressed, with the predatory stillness of a hawk. This was Gavin Fletcher. Julian's blood ran cold. This was not a welcome home. It was an ambush. "What is going on, Serafina?" he asked, his voice losing its confident tone. "Who is this?" "This is Gavin Fletcher," Serafina replied, her gaze steady. "My legal counsel." Julian felt a wave of panic. "Legal counsel? What could this possibly be for? For this, Serafina said, nodding to Genevieve as a large screen on the wall flickered on. It showed a perfectly clear photo of Julian and Chloe, arm in arm, laughing as they left a hotel, then another of them at a cozy restaurant. Then there was another one of Chloe showing off a new designer handbag with Julian beaming right beside her. The last image was a copy of the Air France flight manifest, with both their names highlighted. Julian just stared, speechless. His whole world was crashing down around him. Serafina, I can explain. Can you? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Can you explain why you told me you were in Tokyo trying to save our company, when you were really in Paris on my birthday with Miss Claude Dubois? Can you explain the apartment you rented for her in Soho, the jewelry, the trip to St. Bart's? Or maybe this, the screen changed again, now showing a simple flowchart of the Project Nightingale accounts, with funds being moved around. Julian's face went pale. This was so much worse than he had imagined. She knew. She knew absolutely everything. This is a misunderstanding, he stammered, looking from Serafina to Fletcher and then to Genevieve, who looked at him with pure disgust. Those company files are confidential. How did you get them? You left them on your personal cloud, Julian, Serafina said. Just like you left your affair wide open for me to find. You've gotten arrogant and sloppy. Gavin Fletcher stepped forward.
Mr. Vance, my client,
Mrs. Vance, is filing for divorce on the grounds of adultery and extreme cruelty. Furthermore, we have proof of significant misuse of your shared marital assets. And these Project Nightingale documents, they point to something much more serious. Embezzlement, maybe even fraud. Julian's mind was racing. This was a complete disaster. A public divorce, accusations of fraud. Marcus Thorne would destroy him. The Caio deal would be dead. His career, his reputation, everything was about to be ruined. Serafina, please, he begged. He turned to her, his arrogance gone, replaced by pure, desperate fear. We can talk about this. Just the two of us. Do not do this. He reached for her hand. Serafina pulled away like his touch had burned her. There is nothing left to talk about, Julian. You made your choices. Now I am making mine. Her eyes were cold and clear, with no trace of the woman who once adored him. You wanted a life with Chloe? Fine, but you will not be paying for it with my money, or with money stolen from the company that has your name on it, a name you have disgraced. We have a settlement proposal, Mr. Vance, Fletcher added smoothly. Given the situation, I'm sure you'll find it's in your best interest to accept it quickly and quietly. Unless, of course, you would rather these documents make their way to the SEC. Or perhaps to Marcus Thorne. The threat just hung there in the air. Julian felt cornered and completely outplayed. The woman he had ignored, the wife he had so carelessly betrayed, was now holding all the cards. He looked at Serafina, really looked at her for the first time in years, not as a part of his success, but as a powerful opponent. And in her eyes he saw no mercy, only justice. The penthouse, which was once his castle, now felt like a beautifully decorated prison. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft click of Gavin Fletcher's pen as he slid a document across the table. It was the divorce petition. Julian was in shock. He escaped to a hotel, his mind spinning, trying to figure out how to manage the damage. He had to save something from this mess, anything at all. His first thought was to fight back, to deny everything, to sue her in return. But Fletcher's subtle threat about the SEC and Marcus Thorne was serious. The Project Nightingale files were a ticking time bomb. He called Chloe, his voice tight. There is a problem, a really big one. Serafina knows. She knows everything. Chloe's reaction was not what he expected. Well, it is about time, she exclaimed, a note of victory in her voice. So she is finally gone. When do I get to move into the penthouse? Julian's stomach twisted into a knot. Chloe, you do not understand. She is not just leaving. She's trying to ruin me. She has lawyers, evidence. She even knows about Nightingale. There was a pause. Nightingale? What is that? Chloe asked, her voice suddenly sounding bored. It does not matter, Julian snapped. The point is, this Paris trip, our entire arrangement has just blown up in my face. I need to lay low. You need to lay low. Lay low? Chloe scoffed. Julian, you promised me a life, not a scandal I have to hide from. I gave up a lot for you. Sacrificed? Julian felt a wave of bitter anger. He was the one whose life was falling apart. I have given you everything. You have given me gifts, she shot back. I want the real prize. If Serafina is fighting dirty, maybe I should talk to her, woman to woman. Or maybe to her lawyer. I have my own story to tell, Julian, and I have my own proof. The call ended on a sour note, leaving Julian even more on edge. Chloe, he realized, was not the easygoing distraction he had imagined. She was a wild card he had failed to consider. Meanwhile, Serafina, with help from Fletcher and Anna Sharma, the private investigator, was making her case even stronger. Anna's surveillance in Paris was perfect, giving them a detailed timeline of every single move Julian made with Chloe. But Anna had also looked into Chloe Dubois's background, and what she discovered was very revealing. Chloe was not just some aspiring actress. She had a long history of attaching herself to rich, powerful men. There was a whole string of them, and each affair ended when the man's wife found out, or when Chloe found a better target. She was a professional in her own unique way. Anna also found something more recent. Chloe had been in contact with a journalist from a well-known gossip publication called The City Serpent. It seems Ms. Dubois might be planning to use her story, Anna told Serafina and Fletcher, either to put pressure on Julian or to get a big payout for an exclusive story. Let her, Serafina said, a thoughtful look on her face. If she wants to talk, maybe we should be the ones to listen. She might have information that could help us beyond just the divorce. Fletcher was hesitant. It is risky, Mrs. Vance. She could be a trap, trying to get information for Julian. Or, Serafina replied, she could be someone who sees that Julian Vance is on a sinking ship and is now looking for the closest lifeboat. He lied to her too, in his own way. He used her. Maybe she is finally starting to realize that. Anna was able to set up a private meeting. Serafina, with Fletcher there observing, met Chloe Dubois in a private room at a neutral law firm. Chloe walked in with a practiced air of confidence, but Serafina saw a hint of nervousness in her eyes. She was undeniably beautiful, but there was a toughness about her, a calculating look that the Paris photographs had not shown. Mrs. Vance, Chloe started, her tone surprisingly formal. Or maybe I should say Serafina. I am sure this is awkward, Ms. Dubois, Serafina answered calmly. Let's skip the small talk. My investigator tells me you might be interested in sharing your story. I am just curious why. Chloe leaned forward. Julian is a liar. He lied to you. And he lied to me. He promised me a future that he never planned on giving me. He told me your marriage was already over, just a piece of paper. He said you were cold and distant. Serafina felt a brief sting of pain but pushed it away. And you believed him? I wanted to, Chloe admitted. The life he offered was very tempting. But I am not an idiot. When he called me from New York, panicked and trying to silence me, I knew he was never going to leave you for me. Not for real. I was just a distraction, an expensive hobby. So, what is it that you want, Ms. Dubois? Fletcher cut in, his voice sharp. Chloe turned to him. I want what I am owed. And I want to make sure Julian does not just walk away from this clean, leaving everyone else to deal with the mess. He told me things about his business and about his enemies. Serafina's interest grew. What sort of things? He is terrified of Marcus Thorne, Chloe said. Thorne has been trying to take over Vance Innovations for months now, Julian said. Thorne was playing dirty, using corporate spies, looking for any sign of weakness. She paused. And Julian, well, Julian has been cutting corners. Project Nightingale is not just about taking a little cash for himself. It is much deeper than that. It is a secret fund, yes, but it is also connected to some very shady business in his new technology. Things he would not want the authorities or Thorne to know about, especially about data privacy in their new AI project. This was far more than Serafina had ever hoped for. Chloe was not just confirming the affair. She was giving them a look into the corrupt center of Julian's business deals. Do you have any proof of these accusations? Fletcher asked. Chloe smiled, a predator's flash in her eyes. Julian is arrogant. He likes to brag, and sometimes he likes to record his great ideas. I might just have a few voice memos and copies of some papers he carelessly left on his laptop when I was at his apartment. She mentioned the Soho apartment Julian had rented for her. Serafina glanced at Fletcher. Chloe Dubois could be their secret weapon, not just for the divorce, but for making sure Julian faced every single consequence of his actions at a corporate level. What do you want from us in return for this info, Ms. Dubois? Serafina asked. Immunity from any legal trouble related to my relationship with Julian, Chloe said, and a sum of money large enough to start over, far away from all this. Considerate payment for services provided and for my silence about certain details of my time with Julian that might be embarrassing for everyone involved. Her eyes dropped to Serafina's pregnant belly. Serafina felt a flash of disgust, but saw the opportunity. If this information is as good as you claim and you cooperate, we can discuss terms, she said. But this deal requires your absolute silence, no talking to the press or anyone else. Chloe simply nodded. Agreed. Julian Vance's whole empire was built on lies. It was time the world saw the real man behind the curtain. After Chloe left, Fletcher turned to Serafina. She's playing with fire, but she might have just handed us everything we need to tear Julian's kingdom apart. Serafina felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Julian's betrayal had crushed her, but it had also forced her eyes open. She was now seeing the world and the man she married with a painful new clarity. And she was finding a strength inside herself she never knew she had. The fight was a long way from over, but for the first time, Serafina Vance felt like she was the one in control. They now had Chloe's information-damning voice recordings of Julian bragging about cutting corners with user data on his new AI platform, Synapse. They also had internal memos that showed the full scale of Project Nightingale. Serafina and Fletcher had a choice to make. They could use it as leverage for a quick and profitable divorce settlement, or they could take a much bigger risk. Fletcher mused, if these documents prove what Chloe is saying is true, Julian isn't just facing a divorce. He's facing government investigations, shareholder lawsuits, and a complete loss of public trust. Marcus Thorne will be the least of his problems if the SEC or the FTC find out about this. Serafina thought of Pip and the future she wanted for her child, a future built on honesty, not on the profits of lies and unethical deals. She also thought of the employees at Vance Innovations, good hard-working people who were unknowingly trapped in Julian's web. I don't just want a divorce, Gavin, Serafina said firmly. I want accountability. Julian built his success on a rotten foundation, and it's time for it to collapse. But I refuse to let innocent people suffer. Their strategy had two parts. First, they'd use the leverage to secure a bulletproof divorce settlement that protected Serafina and Pip's future, including a large chunk of Julian's clean assets and full ownership of the penthouse. Second, and this was the controversial part, they decided to anonymously leak a carefully chosen selection of documents about the Synapse data issues and the Project Nightingale fraud. They'd give it to a well-respected financial journalist known for investigative work, instead of going directly to Marcus Thorne or the SEC, at least not yet. This would create public pressure and force the Vance Innovations board to act. It would stop Thorne from just swooping in to buy the company for pennies on the dollar, which would likely mean mass layoffs. Julian, already reeling from the divorce filing and Serafina's initial evidence, was then served with a new, much harsher settlement. It was brutal. He tried to fight it, to negotiate, but Fletcher hinted at the new, more damning information they had on his business practices. Julian was terrified of that information getting out and felt the walls closing in. Then, the article dropped. The headline read, Vance Innovations, Innovation or Illusion. Whistleblower data reveals ethical lapses and financial problems. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Vance Innovation stock crashed. The board called an emergency meeting. Government agencies announced they were starting investigations. Julian was stunned. He assumed Serafina would use the information in their divorce, not to publicly execute his entire company. He called her, his voice a mix of fury and pure desperation. Serafina, what did you do? He screamed. You're destroying it all. My company, my legacy, our legacy. Serafina's voice was pure ice. You destroyed that when you decided to lie, cheat, and steal. Julian, you built a house of cards. Did you really think it would last forever? This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the people you hurt with your greed. The Vance Innovations board, facing unbelievable pressure, had no other choice but to act fast. Julian Vance was forced to resign as CEO. An interim CEO was hired to clean up the mess and cooperate with the investigators. Marcus Thorne, meanwhile, saw his opening. But the public backlash meant he couldn't just dismantle the company. He would have to make a more reasonable offer, one that could possibly save more jobs. During the chaos, Chloe Dubois, having delivered her information and received her payment, quietly disappeared. She had played her part and made her exit. Serafina felt no connection to her. just a grim acknowledgement of their temporary deal. Julian was a social outcast. His name, once a symbol of innovation, was now tied to scandal and fraud. He was facing possible criminal charges, lawsuits, and the total loss of his social standing. The friends who used to flock to his side were all gone. He was alone, completely alone, just as Serafina had been on her birthday. The divorce was finalized in record time. Serafina received everything she had asked for. The penthouse was hers, free and clear. Pip's future was secure. But Julian had one last cruel twist waiting, a final desperate act of revenge. A few weeks after he resigned, Serafina was meeting with decorators to turn the cold penthouse into a warm home when she received a certified letter. It was from Julian's lawyers. He was contesting paternity after everything. After all the proof of his affairs and his financial crimes, he was now trying to cast doubt on the legitimacy of their child, his own child. It was a vile, baseless lie, a final attempt to hurt her and drag her through the mud one last time. Genevieve was practically vibrating with rage. Of all the disgusting, cowardly things he could do, he knows Pip is his. This is only to hurt you, to ruin this for you. Serafina felt a cold fury she'd never known. This wasn't about business or money anymore. This was about her child. She had wanted accountability, and she got it. But this personal, cruel attack was a line Julian should not have crossed. He wants to play dirty to the very end, doesn't he? Serafina said, her voice dangerously calm. Fine, let him. We'll get the paternity test. And when it proves what we both know is true, I will make sure it is the final nail in his coffin. Not just his professional coffin, but his personal one. No one will ever look at Julian Vance again without remembering this pathetic, final act of spite. She picked up her phone and called Gavin Fletcher. Julian's contesting paternity. Gavin, I want full custody, but I also want to add a defamation lawsuit to his problems once this is done, and make sure those test results go public. He wants to humiliate me. He has no idea what he just started. In his desperation, Julian had miscalculated badly one more time. He thought he was delivering one last wound, but all he did was strengthen Serafina's resolve to completely erase him from her life and protect her child. With the fierceness of a lioness, his final attempt at betrayal would only speed up his complete and total downfall. The court-ordered paternity test was a quick, sterile process. The results were clear. Julian Vance was, with 99.99% certainty, the father of Serafina's unborn child. The news, which Fletcher's office strategically leaked, was the last humiliating blow. His attempt to cause pain had backfired in a spectacular way, painting him not just as a cheat and a fraud, but as a spiteful, delusional man. The defamation suit was quietly settled, costing him even more of his shrinking funds. Julian was broken, stripped of his company, his money, and his reputation. He was living in limbo, holed up in a generic rented apartment in Queens, a world away from the penthouse. The walls were thin, the furniture was cheap, and the view was of a brick wall. It was a beige-colored hell. His days were a blur of sleepless nights and empty afternoons. He would wake up past noon, the stale air thick with the smell of old takeout. His mornings, once filled with power plays, were now spent scrolling through news on a cheap laptop, watching his own name get dragged through the digital mud. He'd watch his old interviews and flinch, feeling a phantom pain for the charm he used to have. He was a digital ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. He rarely left the apartment. One day, desperate for a decent coffee, he went to a local cafe. A young woman at the counter stared at him, her eyes wide with recognition, before she whispered to her coworker. Julian saw the look they shared. It wasn't admiration, but a morbid curiosity. He fled, his face burning, a bitter taste in his mouth that wasn't from the bad coffee. His lawyer, a frantic public defender named Mort, was constantly exhausted. "Julian, you have to help me help you," Mort pleaded during one of their depressing meetings in his cramped, fluorescent-lit office. "The prosecution's case is solid. We could try for a plea deal, but you have to show some remorse. You have to participate." Julian just stared out the dirty window. "Remorse? They stole everything from me." "Mort, Serafina, she stole everything." Mort sighed, rubbing his temples. "She didn't steal it, Julian. You gave it all away. You handed her the weapon, the reason, and a map showing where the body was buried. This pity party is something you just cannot afford." Serafina, on the other hand, was absolutely thriving. As her due date got closer, she threw herself into reclaiming her home and her identity. The penthouse, once a shrine to Julian's ego and her beautiful prison, was about to undergo a massive change. Cold, intimidating sculptures were swapped out for vibrant paintings by up-and-coming female artists. The stark white walls were repainted in warm, welcoming shades of cream and sage, and Julian's enormous office, the place where she first discovered his betrayal, was transformed into a sun-filled library and playroom. The shelves were no longer filled with business books, but with classic novels, philosophy, and children's stories. The room now had the scent of lemon polish and baby powder, not old ambition. It was no longer a house for showing off. It was a home. With Genevieve's help, she launched the Phoenix Initiative, a foundation created to fund and mentor women-led tech startups focused on ethical ideas. It was a direct and intentional jab at Julian's corrupt legacy. Her new advisory board was a team of sharp, caring female financial and legal experts, a stark contrast to the flattering yes-men who had always surrounded Julian. In their first major meeting, Serafina supported a startup founded by a brilliant young coder named Priya, whose work on a groundbreaking data compression algorithm had been stolen by her previous male boss. Priya's story of being erased really hit home for Serafina. "This is exactly why we are here," Serafina announced to the board, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "To make sure talent is supported, not taken advantage of. To build more tables, not higher glass ceilings." The Phoenix Initiative not only funded Priya, but also gave her the legal power to sue her former company. Months later, Priya won her case, getting both the patent and a huge settlement. She became one of the foundation's biggest supporters, a living example of Serafina's new mission. The board meetings were full of teamwork, laughter, and passionate debates, a world away from the fear-based loyalty her husband had always demanded. A few months later, Serafina gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Theodore, which means gift of God. But to her, he would always be Pip. Holding him in the peaceful quiet of the nursery, with the city lights twinkling softly outside, Serafina felt a deep sense of calm. The love she had for her son was like a clean, pure fire, strong enough to burn away the last traces of her husband's shadow. Genevieve was there, holding her nephew with tears in her eyes. "You did it, Sarah," she whispered. "You built a better world for him before he even got here." One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after that terrible birthday, Serafina was pushing Theodore in his stroller through Central Park. The air was cool and smelled like roasted chestnuts and damp soil. The leaves were a stunning mix of gold and red, crunching underneath the stroller's wheels. She noticed a figure on a bench in the distance, bundled up in a thin coat that wasn't warm enough for the chilly weather. As she got closer, she started to slow down. It was Julian. He looked smaller, thin, and his once perfect suit was now worn and didn't fit him right. The vibrant, charming giant of industry was gone. In his place was a ghost, haunted by his own bad decisions. He was staring blankly at the children playing on the grass, and you could almost feel his loneliness. He didn't notice her. Serafina stopped, her heart aching for a moment like an echo from a past life. A confusing mix of feelings washed over her. There was no hatred left, just a quiet, deep sadness. Sadness for the amazing man he could have been, for the life they could have had, and for the fatal flaw in his character that had ruined everything. She recalled a time, early in their relationship, when they walked down the same path. He had grabbed her hand, pulled her behind a huge oak tree to kiss her, laughing like a young boy. He had whispered promises into her hair, promises of a future that felt as strong as that oak tree. Where did that man go? Was he ever even real? Or was he just another one of Julian's convincing illusions, one she had been far too eager to believe? He had owned the world, but his soul was full of holes. Seeing him so utterly defeated didn't give her a thrilling sense of victory, but a calm feeling of closure. He was no longer the monster in her story. He was just a man who had lost his way, a chapter in her life that was now officially closed. She adjusted Theodore's blanket, her expression softening as she looked at her son's sleeping face. This was her world now. This pure, absolute love, this quiet, unbreakable. She gently pushed the stroller forward, her path leading her away from the bench, away from the lingering shadow of her past, and toward the bright promise of her future. From the bench, Julian's gaze wandered. His dull, unfocused eyes latched onto a woman walking away. There was something about the way she carried herself, the confident set of her shoulders, that caught his eye. She stopped to fix the blanket in a stroller, and that gentle movement sparked something deep in his memory, an image of a sunny room, a happy voice telling him news he had simply ignored. "We're having a baby, Julian." He saw the stylish woman and the expensive stroller, and for one heart-stopping second, the fog in his brain cleared, shattered by the bright autumn sunlight. Serafina. It wasn't just that he recognized her. It was an explosion of memory and loss. He could almost smell her perfume, the light scent of freesia she always wore. He could feel the ghost of her hand in his. In that one brief moment, he saw everything he had destroyed. The quiet mornings they spent reading the paper together, the way she would bite her lip when she was focused, the unwavering faith in her eyes before he had snuffed it out. He didn't just see a woman. He saw a life, a future, an entire universe he had burned to the ground for cheap thrills and a weak ego. A sudden pang of loss, sharper and more real than anything he had felt in months, cut through his haze of self-pity. He didn't understand why it hurt so much. He just knew he was cold, and he was completely and forever alone. A single hot tear, the first he had cried through the entire mess, carved a path through the dirt on his cheek. It wasn't a tear of self-pity, but one of genuine, soul-crushing loss. Serafina never looked back. The millionaire's wife was gone. In her place was Serafina Vance, a mother, a philanthropist, a survivor, and the creator of her own destiny. The world had tried to steal everything from her. Instead, she had taken her life back and built something far more precious on the ruins. Her son made a happy noise, and Serafina smiled, her face turned up to the sun. Years went by. Julian accepted a plea deal, his sentence reduced for helping to unravel the complicated network of fake companies he had created. He spent 3 years in a low-security federal prison and was released into a world that had completely forgotten about him. He got a job as a night shift data entry clerk. The irony was lost on everyone except himself. Serafina's life, meanwhile, just kept getting better. The Phoenix Initiative grew to be a huge influence in the tech industry. Theodore grew into a kind, curious boy with his mother's calm eyes and a wonderfully bright smile. One afternoon, when Theodore was 7, he came home from school looking sad. A boy had cheated in a race and then bragged about winning. Serafina sat with him in the library as the late afternoon sun poured through the large windows. "It's not fair," Theodore said, his chin quivering. "No, it is not," Serafina agreed, stroking his hair. "But Pip, you need to understand something. Some people believe that winning is all that matters, no matter how they do it. They think being clever is better than being good. But the trophy they win feels empty because they know they didn't really earn it. Your father, he was one of those people." It was the first time she had ever talked about him so openly. He won a lot of things, but in the end, he lost the most important thing himself. The greatest prize, the only one that truly matters, is being able to look in the mirror and be proud of the person you see. You ran a good race and you were honest. That makes you the real winner. She would teach her sons about strength and kindness, about integrity and respect. She would give him a legacy not of wealth, but of worth. And that was a treasure that no one could ever take away. What did you think of Serafina's journey from heartbreak to empowerment? Could you have been as strategic in her shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and revenge grabbed you, please give this video a huge like, share it with someone who needs to hear that strength can be found in the deepest betrayals, and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next jaw-dropping story. Thanks for watching.